The autumn winds howled across the barren fields of northern Denmark, carrying with them the promise of a harsh winter. Erik Gunnarsson pulled his woolen cloak tighter around his shoulders as he guided his oxen through the muddy furrows of his meagre farmland. At 25, he had already seen more hardship than most men twice his age. The small plot of land he worked had been his father's, and his father's before him, but each generation seemed to struggle more than the last. The sky above churned with dark clouds, and Erik knew he had little time to finish gathering the last of his barley harvest before the storm struck. His weathered hands gripped the wooden plough handle as he urged the tired beasts forward. The grain he managed to salvage would barely see him through the winter months, but it was all he had. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Erik heard something that made him pause. Over the rumble of thunder, he could make out the sound of voices carried on the wind. Not just any voices, but the desperate cries of people in distress. He released the plough and shaded his eyes against the growing darkness, scanning the horizon. There, near the edge of the forest that bordered his land, he could see movement. 2 figures stumbled through the tall grass, supporting each other as they moved. Even from a distance, Erik could tell something was wrong. The way they moved spoke of exhaustion and injury. Without hesitation, Erik abandoned his work and ran toward the struggling figures. As he drew closer, his eyes widened in amazement. The 2 people were women, but not ordinary women. They stood nearly as tall as Erik himself, with broad shoulders and muscled arms that spoke of a lifetime of training with weapons. Their long blonde hair was matted with mud and blood, and their clothing, though torn and dirty, bore the unmistakable marks of quality craftsmanship. The first woman, who appeared to be the elder of the 2, had a deep gash across her forehead that had bled down over her left eye. Her younger companion limped badly, favouring her right leg, where Erik could see a makeshift bandage wrapped around what was clearly a serious wound. "Help us," the older woman gasped as Erik approached. She spoke in the Danish tongue, though her accent suggested she came from lands further north. "We have been walking for 2 days without food or proper shelter." Erik did not hesitate. "Come," he said, moving to support the injured younger woman. "My home is just beyond those trees. You can rest there and tend to your wounds." The 2 women exchanged glances, and Erik caught a look of surprise pass between them. Perhaps they had not expected such kindness from a stranger, especially one who was clearly a man of humble means. "I am Astrid," the older woman said as they made their way slowly across the field. "This is my sister Ingrid. We are grateful for your help, though I fear we have little to offer in return." "No payment is needed," Erik replied, adjusting his grip to better support Ingrid's weight. "In times like these, we must help one another survive." As they reached Erik's modest dwelling, a simple wooden structure with a thatched roof, the storm finally broke in earnest. Rain poured from the sky in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees with enough force to bend the strongest branches. Erik quickly ushered the 2 women inside and set about building up the fire in the central hearth. His home was sparse but clean, containing little more than a sleeping alcove, a simple wooden table and bench, and shelves lined with pottery and tools. The women settled gratefully near the warmth of the flames. "You are Shieldmaidens," Erik observed as he prepared warm water and clean cloth to tend their wounds. It was not a question. Their bearing, their scars, and the way they carried themselves even in their weakened state made their profession clear. Astrid nodded, wincing as Erik began to clean the cut on her forehead. "We serve Jarl Magnus of the Northern Fjords, or rather we did serve him until 3 days ago. What happened?" Erik asked gently, moving to examine Ingrid's leg wound. The 2 sisters exchanged another look, and Erik sensed there was more to their story than simple misfortune. Ingrid spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We were betrayed," she said simply, "by men we trusted, men we had fought beside for years." Erik said nothing more, focusing instead on cleaning and rebandaging their injuries with strips of clean linen. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best kindness was simply to listen when people were ready to speak, and to remain silent when they were not. As the storm raged outside, Erik prepared what food he could spare: barley porridge with dried meat and herbs, and fresh water from his well. It was simple fare, but the women ate as though it were a feast, fit for kings. "You have shown us great kindness," Astrid said, after they had finished eating. Most would not welcome armed women into their homes, especially strangers. Erik smiled. My mother always said that the gods judge us not by what we have, but by what we choose to share with others. Besides, you are clearly warriors of honor. Whatever troubles may have brought you to my door. As the night deepened and the storm continued its assault on the small farmstead, the three of them settled near the fire. Erik offered his sleeping alcove to the women, but they insisted on taking turns keeping watch. Old habits that spoke of lives lived always on the edge of danger. Tomorrow, Astrid said quietly as they prepared to rest, we must continue our journey. We have imposed on your hospitality long enough. But Erik shook his head. Stay as long as you need to heal properly. Winter is coming, and these wounds need time to mend before you travel again. Neither woman argued further, though Erik could see the gratitude in their eyes. As he settled down to sleep on a pile of furs near the fire, Erik had no way of knowing that his simple act of kindness would soon change the course of his entire life. What country are you from? I want to ensure the story resonates with your cultural context while avoiding any YouTube-prohibited content. The storm raged for 3 days and nights, trapping Erik and his unexpected guests inside the small farmhouse. During this time, a strange bond began to form between the humble farmer and the 2 warrior women who had stumbled into his life. On the first morning after their arrival, Erik woke to find Astrid already awake, sitting by the dying embers of the fire. Her blue eyes, now clear of the blood and exhaustion that had clouded them the night before, watched him with careful assessment. In the dim light filtering through the single window, he could see the full extent of her injuries more clearly. Besides the gash on her forehead, she bore numerous smaller cuts and bruises that spoke of recent combat. You sleep soundly for a man who has taken in 2 armed strangers, she observed, though there was no hostility in her voice. Erik stretched and began to stoke the fire back to life. Perhaps I am foolish, but I have learned to trust my instincts about people. Besides, if you meant me harm, you would have acted already. Ingrid stirred from where she lay, wrapped in furs near the wall. Her leg wound had bled through the bandages during the night, and Erik could see she was in considerable pain, though she tried to hide it. Let me tend to that, Erik offered, moving toward his supplies of healing herbs. You know something of medicine? Astrid asked with surprise. Erik nodded as he prepared a poultice from dried willow bark and honey. When you live alone and far from any settlement, you learn to care for yourself. My grandmother taught me the ways of healing plants before she passed. As he carefully cleaned and redressed Ingrid's wound, Erik noticed how both women watched his every movement with the vigilance of those accustomed to danger. Yet gradually, as the hours passed, and Erik continued to show them nothing but genuine kindness, their guard began to lower slightly. Tell me about your farm, Astrid said as Erik prepared their morning meal. Have you always lived here alone? My parents died of the wasting sickness 3 winters ago, Erik explained, stirring the pot of porridge over the fire. I have worked this land since I was old enough to hold a plough. It is not much, but it is home. Ingrid struggled to sit up, accepting Erik's help without protest this time. Do you never think of leaving? Seeking your fortune in the service of a Jarl or joining a trading expedition? Erik considered the question as he ladled food into wooden bowls. I have thought of it, yes, but this land has been in my family for 4 generations. Someone must tend it, must keep the old ways alive. Besides, I am not a warrior like you. My talents lie in growing things, not destroying them. There is honor in both, Astrid said firmly. A warrior fights to protect what farmers create. Without farmers, there would be nothing worth fighting for. As the day wore on, the 3 of them found ways to pass the time, despite being confined by the continuing storm. Erik shared stories of his family and the history of his small corner of Denmark. The sisters, in turn, began to speak more freely of their own past. They had been born to a minor Jarl in the far north, twins who showed exceptional size and strength from an early age. Their father, having no male heirs, had chosen to train them as warriors rather than seek advantageous marriages for them. They had served faithfully in the household guard of Jarl Magnus for nearly 10 years, earning reputations as formidable fighters and loyal retainers. Magnus treated us with respect, Astrid explained, as she helped Erik mend a torn section of his roof thatch from inside the house. We were not merely ornaments in his hall, but true members of his warband. We fought in 3 major battles and countless smaller skirmishes. Then what changed? Erik asked carefully. Ingrid's face darkened. Magnus has a nephew, Thorvald, an ambitious man who believes women have no place in a warrior's hall. As Magnus grew older and began to rely more heavily on his advisors, Thorvald's influence grew stronger. 3 nights ago, Astrid continued, we were returning from a successful raid against Danish raiders who had been troubling our territory. Thorvald and his men turned on us during the march home. They accused us of cowardice in battle, claimed we had fled when our shield brothers needed us most. Erik felt anger rise in his chest at the injustice of it. From what he had observed of these women, cowardice was the last thing they could be accused of. It was a lie, of course, Ingrid said bitterly, but Thorvald had convinced several of the younger warriors to support his version of events. Magnus was not there to defend us, and by the laws of our people, the word of multiple warriors against our own was enough to condemn us. They stripped us of our weapons and armor, gave us only basic traveling clothes and cast us out, Astrid finished. We were forbidden to return to our homeland on pain of death. The storm continued to howl outside as Erik absorbed this tale of betrayal and injustice. He had lived his entire life as a simple farmer, far removed from the politics and conflicts of Jarls and their courts. Yet the basic unfairness of what had happened to these women stirred something deep within him. "Where will you go when the storm passes?" he asked. The sisters exchanged glances. "We do not know," Astrid admitted. "Perhaps south to the Saxon lands, or west across the sea to Iceland. Somewhere we can start anew." Erik nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing more on the subject. As night fell, and they settled once again around the fire, he found himself studying the 2 women with growing admiration. Despite their ordeal, they maintained their dignity and strength. They shared the work of maintaining the fire and preparing food without being asked, and treated him with a respect he had rarely experienced from others. That night, as the wind continued to batter the walls of his small home, Erik lay awake thinking about the strange turn his quiet life had taken. He had always been content with his simple existence, but something about these remarkable women made him question whether there might be more to life than he had ever imagined. In the darkness, he heard Astrid's voice speaking quietly to her sister in their northern dialect. Though he could not understand all the words, he caught enough to realize they were discussing him, and their tone suggested a growing respect for the humble farmer who had shown them such unexpected kindness. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, revealing a world transformed by wind and rain. Erik stepped outside his home to assess the damage and found that while his small dwelling had weathered the tempest well, much of his remaining harvest lay scattered and ruined across the muddy fields. Astrid and Ingrid emerged behind him, both moving with less pain than they had shown in previous days. The rest and proper care had worked wonders on their injuries. Though Ingrid still favoured her wounded leg, "The damage is extensive," Astrid observed, surveying the destruction with a warrior's eye for detail. Erik nodded grimly as he walked among the ruined grain. "What the storm did not destroy, it is buried in mud. I fear this winter will be harder than most." Without a word, both women began gathering what salvageable grain they could find. Erik started to protest that they were his guests and should not concern themselves with his problems, but Astrid silenced him with a look. "You have given us shelter, food, and healing when we had nothing to offer in return," she said firmly. "We are not helpless maidens to sit idle while our host faces hardship." For the next several hours, the 3 of them worked side by side in the fields. Despite their injuries, the sisters proved to be surprisingly capable farmhands. Their strength, developed through years of weapon training, served them well in the heavy work of salvaging grain and clearing debris. As they worked, Erik found himself marveling at how naturally they fell into the rhythm of farm labour. Many warriors he knew would consider such work beneath their dignity, but Astrid and Ingrid approached each task with the same methodical determination they had likely shown in battle. "You learn quickly," Erik commented as he watched Ingrid efficiently separate good grain from spoiled with an improvised sieve. "A warrior must be adaptable," she replied with a slight smile. "Besides, this work is not so different from maintaining a war camp. The principles are the same, only the tools change." By midday, they had salvaged perhaps half of what Erik had originally hoped to harvest. It was still far less than he needed for winter, but significantly more than he had expected to save after seeing the initial damage. As they paused to rest and share a simple meal of bread and dried fish, Astrid broached a subject that had clearly been on her mind. "Erik," she began carefully, "Ingrid and I have been discussing our situation. Our injuries are nearly healed, and we cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely." Erik felt an unexpected stab of disappointment at her words, though he tried to hide it. Over the past few days, he had grown accustomed to having company in his usually solitary home. More than that, he had come to genuinely respect and care for these remarkable women. "You are welcome to stay as long as you wish," he said sincerely. "I have enjoyed having people to talk with, and your help with the harvest has been invaluable." "That is generous of you," Ingrid said. "But we cannot remain here forever. We need to make plans for our future." Astrid leaned forward, her expression serious. "However, we have a proposal to make. Winter is coming, and you have just admitted that your harvest will not be sufficient to see you through the cold months. Ingrid and I have skills that might prove valuable, not just to you, but to this entire region." Erik raised an eyebrow, curious about what she had in mind. "There are bandits in these parts," Astrid continued. "We saw signs of their passage during our journey here. Small farms like yours are easy targets for desperate men when the snows come and food becomes scarce." "What are you suggesting?" Erik asked. "Let us stay through the winter," Ingrid said. "We can help protect not just your farm, but others in the area. In exchange for food and shelter, we offer our skills as warriors." Erik was quiet for a long moment, considering their proposal. The idea of having 2 trained fighters residing on his property was certainly appealing from a security standpoint. But there was more to his hesitation than simple practical concerns. "People in this region are simple farmers and craftsmen," he said finally. "They might be suspicious of armed women, especially those with no local connections. Your accents mark you as foreigners, and that alone might cause problems." "We had considered that," Astrid acknowledged. "But surely the practical benefits would outweigh such concerns. When bandits threaten their families and livestock, do you think they will care where we come from?" Erik found himself nodding slowly. The logic was sound, and the truth was that he desperately wanted them to stay, though he was reluctant to examine too closely why that should be so. "There is wisdom in what you say," he admitted. "But if you are to remain here, you will need to be seen as more than just hired swords. The people must come to trust and accept you as part of the community." "How do you suggest we accomplish that?" Ingrid asked. Erik was quiet for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Tomorrow is market day in the village of Bjornstad, about half a day's walk from here. I was planning to go there anyway to trade some of my salvaged grain for winter supplies. Why don't you come with me? Let people see that you are reasonable, helpful individuals rather than fearsome strangers." The sisters exchanged glances, and Erik could see them weighing the proposal. It would be a risk for them to appear publicly so soon after their exile. But it was also an opportunity to begin building the new life they needed. "Very well," Astrid said at length. "We will come with you to this market, but we go as your companions, not as your servants or hired guards. If we are to make a place for ourselves here, it must be as equals." Erik extended his hand to each of them in turn. "Agreed. Partners then, in whatever may come." As they shook hands, Erik felt as though he was sealing more than just a simple business arrangement. Something fundamental had changed in his life, and though he could not yet see where this new path might lead, he found himself eager to discover what lay ahead. That evening, as they prepared for the journey to market, the 3 of them planned their approach carefully. They would present themselves as traveling companions who had decided to winter in the area. Astrid and Ingrid would keep their weapons hidden but easily accessible, and they would let Erik take the lead in all conversations. "Remember," Erik said as they settled down for the night, "tomorrow we find out whether this partnership has a future." The journey to Bjornstad began before dawn, with Erik leading his small ox cart loaded with salvaged grain, while Astrid and Ingrid walked alongside. The sisters had carefully concealed their weapons beneath travelling cloaks, appearing for all the world like ordinary women accompanying a farmer to market. The village of Bjornstad nestled in a valley where 2 streams converged, its wooden buildings clustered around a central square that served as the weekly marketplace. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys in the crisp morning air, and the sound of voices carried on the wind as the community prepared for another day of trade and commerce. As they approached the market square, Erik could feel the eyes of the villagers upon them. Bjornstad was small enough that strangers were always noticed, and the presence of 2 tall, obviously foreign women was certain to attract attention. "Stay close," Erik murmured to his companions. "Let me handle the initial introductions." They set up their modest stall near the edge of the square, displaying Erik's grain in wooden bowls to show its quality. Almost immediately, several of the regular traders approached to examine the goods and, more obviously, to get a closer look at Erik's mysterious companions. "Morning." "Erik!" called out Bjorn the miller, a stout man with flour perpetually dusting his beard. "I see you have brought some friends to market today." "Good morning, Bjorn," Erik replied with practiced ease. "May I present Astrid and Ingrid? They are travellers from the northern regions who have decided to winter in our area." Bjorn nodded politely to the women, though Erik could see curiosity burning in his eyes. "Northerners, eh? Long way from home, are you not?" "Sometimes a change of scenery is good for the soul," Astrid replied diplomatically, her accent clearly marking her origins, but her tone friendly and respectful. As the morning progressed, more villagers stopped by Erik's stall. Some came genuinely interested in purchasing grain. Others were clearly motivated by curiosity about the newcomers. Astrid and Ingrid handled each interaction with careful politeness, answering questions about their travels without revealing too much about their true circumstances. The real test came when Ragnar the blacksmith approached their stall, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a perpetually skeptical expression. Ragnar was known throughout the village for his blunt speaking and his ability to spot trouble from great distances. "Erik," Ragnar said without preamble, "these women of yours have the look of warriors about them. Their hands show calluses from sword work, and they move like fighters despite their efforts to appear otherwise." Erik felt tension ripple through his companions, though neither woman's expression changed. This was the moment they had prepared for, the inevitable confrontation with someone sharp enough to see through their carefully constructed facade. "You have a keen eye." "Ragnar," Astrid said calmly, stepping forward to address the blacksmith directly. "It is true that we have training with weapons. In the northern territories, such skills are necessary for survival, but we come here seeking peace, not conflict." "And what brings two Shieldmaidens to our quiet corner of Denmark?" Ragnar asked, his tone neutral but his eyes watchful. Ingrid spoke up, her voice steady and honest. "We found ourselves without a home through circumstances beyond our control. Erik showed us kindness when we were injured and desperate. In return, we offer our skills to help protect this community through the coming winter." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Some faces showed suspicion, others curiosity, and a few registered what might have been hope. "Protect us from what?" asked Astrid the Weaver, an elderly woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper wit. "Bandits," Erik said simply. "The same ones who raided the Lindbergh farm last winter, and who attacked the merchant caravan near Oakwood 2 months ago. They grow bolder as the weather turns cold and honest work becomes harder to find." This declaration caused a much stronger reaction among the villagers. The bandit raids had been a growing concern for everyone in the region, and the local militia was too small and poorly equipped to provide adequate protection for the scattered farms and settlements. "What makes you think 2 women, however skilled, can succeed where armed men have failed?" challenged Olaf the carpenter, a thin man with nervous eyes. "Because," Astrid said with quiet confidence, "we do not think like farmers forced to fight. We think like warriors who choose to protect. There is a significant difference." To demonstrate her point, Astrid suddenly spun and caught a small stone that had been thrown from somewhere in the crowd. Moving so quickly that most observers barely saw the motion, she examined the stone calmly, then tossed it back in the general direction from which it had come. "Your son has good aim, Carpenter Olaf," she said mildly, "but perhaps he should save his stones for actual enemies rather than potential allies." A red-faced boy of perhaps 12 years emerged from behind a nearby stall, clearly the culprit who had thrown the stone to test the strange women's reflexes. Instead of anger, however, Astrid's expression showed only mild amusement. "That was well done, young man," she said to the embarrassed boy. "But next time you wish to test someone's skills, simply ask. We have nothing to hide." The crowd's mood began to shift perceptibly. The demonstration had been impressive without being threatening, and Astrid's handling of the boy's prank showed both competence and good humour. Ragnar stroked his beard thoughtfully. "You speak of protection, but what would you require in return? Gold? Land? A share of our harvests?" "Only what Erik has already offered," Ingrid replied. "Food and shelter through the winter months. We seek to earn our place here through service, not to enrich ourselves at your expense." An old farmer named Gunther, whose small holding lay on the dangerous eastern edge of the settlement area, stepped forward. "If you are truly willing to help protect our farms, I, for one, would welcome your presence." My family lives in constant fear during the winter months. Several other voices chimed in with agreement, and Erik could see the tide of opinion beginning to turn in their favor. The practical benefits of having trained warriors in the area were becoming clear to people who had lived too long with the threat of bandit raids. Very well, Ragnar said at length, speaking with the authority of the village's unofficial leader. You may winter among us, but understand that you will be watched, and any sign of treachery or abuse of your position will be met with swift justice. We would expect nothing less, Astrid replied formally. We thank you for your trust and pledge to prove ourselves worthy of it. As the crowd began to disperse and normal market activity resumed, Erik felt a surge of relief and pride. His companions had handled themselves perfectly, showing just enough of their capabilities to be impressive while maintaining the humble demeanor necessary to gain acceptance. That went better than I had hoped, he murmured to Astrid as they began packing up their stall. For the journey home, the first test is passed, she agreed, but the real challenges still lie ahead. 2 weeks had passed since the market day in Bjornstad, and Astrid and Ingrid had begun to settle into their new life alongside Erik. They had helped fortify his farm with better fences and defensive positions, shared their knowledge of winter survival techniques, and even begun teaching some of the local young men basic combat skills. The community's initial wariness had gradually given way to acceptance and even appreciation for the sisters' contributions. Erik found himself happier than he had been in years. The quiet loneliness that had pervaded his life since his parents' death had been replaced by the warmth of companionship and shared purpose. He caught himself looking forward to each new day, curious to see what challenges or discoveries it might bring. On a cold morning when frost covered the ground like scattered silver, Erik was working in his workshop repairing tools when Ingrid burst through the door, her face pale with urgency. Ships, she said breathlessly. 3 longships approaching from the north, flying the banner of Jarl Magnus. Erik felt his stomach drop. He had hoped they might have more time to establish themselves before their past caught up with them. Through the small window, he could see Astrid already positioning herself where she could observe the approaching vessels while remaining concealed. Are you certain it is Magnus? Erik asked, though he could see the answer in Ingrid's troubled expression. The Red Raven banner is unmistakable, she confirmed, and I recognize the figurehead on the lead ship. It is Magnus himself, not just his representatives. Within the hour, word had spread throughout the scattered farmsteads and the village of Bjornstad. A Jarl's visit was a momentous event, especially one arriving with a full war band. Speculation ran wild about the purpose of such an impressive display of force in their peaceful region. Erik, Astrid, and Ingrid watched from a hill overlooking the fjord as the 3 ships made their landing. Even from a distance, they could see the glint of weapons and armor as perhaps 60 warriors disembarked. At the center of the group, a figure in a magnificent blue cloak directed the others with obvious authority. That is Magnus, Astrid confirmed, her voice tight with old loyalties and fresh concerns. But why has he come here? How could he possibly know where we are? Perhaps he does not, Erik suggested hopefully. This could be coincidence, some other business that brings him to Denmark. Ingrid shook her head grimly. Magnus does not travel with 3 ships, unless he expects either significant resistance or wishes to make a powerful impression. This is no coincidence. As they watched, a smaller group detached itself from the main force and began making its way inland, clearly heading toward the settlement. Erik counted approximately 15 men, all fully armed and armored, with Magnus himself at their head. We should flee, Ingrid said urgently, while there is still time to escape into the forest. But Astrid straightened her shoulders, her expression resolving into the determined mask Erik had seen her wear when facing difficult decisions. No, we run now, and we will be running for the rest of our lives. Besides, if Magnus truly wished us harm, he would have sent raiders in the night, not announced his presence with such ceremony. Erik found himself admiring her courage, even as he feared for what was about to unfold. What do you think he wants? Only one way to find out, Astrid replied. We go to meet him. They made their way down from the hill and positioned themselves in the main square of Bjornstad, where a crowd was already gathering to witness the unprecedented arrival of a northern Jarl. Ragnar the blacksmith stood at the front of the group, clearly intending to speak for the community if necessary. When Magnus and his retinue entered the square, Erik was struck immediately by the man's commanding presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, with iron-grey hair and beard, the Jarl moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His pale blue eyes swept the crowd assessingly before settling on the two sisters who stood waiting for him. Astrid and Ingrid, daughters of Hakon, Magnus said formally, his voice carrying easily across the square. I have travelled far to find you. Lord Magnus, Astrid replied, stepping forward and inclining her head respectfully, but not subserviently. We are surprised to see you so far from your northern halls. I'm certain you are, Magnus said dryly. Just as I was surprised to learn that my two most valued Shieldmaidens had vanished from my lands under mysterious circumstances. A murmur ran through the watching villagers at this revelation. Erik could see curiosity and concern warring in their faces as they realized there was much more to their winter guests than they had suspected. We were exiled. My lord, Ingrid said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the square. Cast out as cowards and oath-breakers by your nephew Thorvald and his supporters. Magnus's expression darkened at these words, and several of his warriors shifted uncomfortably. Yes, I have heard Thorvald's version of events. Quite a different tale than the one I learned when I finally had opportunity to question the other survivors of that expedition. Erik felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. If Magnus had investigated further and discovered the truth of what had happened, perhaps the sisters' exile need not be permanent. 3 days after your departure, Magnus continued, his voice growing harder, I returned from negotiations with the Danish king to find my warband reduced by 2 of its finest members. When I demanded explanations, the accounts I received were confused and contradictory. It took considerable effort to uncover the truth. The Jarl's pale eyes fixed on someone in his own retinue, and Erik saw a younger man step forward reluctantly. Even without introduction, Erik could tell this must be the infamous Thorvald. The family resemblance to Magnus was clear, but where the older man radiated controlled authority, the nephew seemed to project only sullen resentment. Tell them, Thorvald, Magnus commanded. Tell these people what you told me when I pressed you for the truth. Thorvald's face flushed red, but he seemed unable to meet anyone's eyes directly. The accusations against Astrid and Ingrid were false, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. They fought with honor and courage as they always have. Speak louder, Magnus ordered harshly. Let everyone hear your words. The accusations were false, Thorvald repeated more loudly, his voice cracking with shame and anger. I convinced the others to support my lies because I believed women had no place in a warrior's hall. I was wrong. A shocked silence fell over the square. Erik could see the stunned expressions on the faces of the villagers who had come to respect and trust the two sisters. To learn that they had been wrongfully accused and exiled must have been difficult to process. Magnus turned his attention back to Astrid and Ingrid. I have come to offer you restoration to your rightful places in my household. Your exile is hereby ended, your honor restored, and your positions as my Shieldmaidens returned to you. The silence that followed Magnus's offer stretched long and heavy across the square. Erik watched the faces of the two sisters, trying to read the emotions that flickered across their features. This was the moment he had been dreading since their first night together, when he had somehow known that their presence in his life would be temporary. Astrid and Ingrid exchanged a long look, the kind of wordless communication that Erik had observed between them many times over the past weeks. Finally, Astrid stepped forward to address her former lord. We are honored by your offer, Lord Magnus, she said carefully, and grateful that you took the time to discover the truth of what happened. But we cannot simply pretend that the past weeks never occurred. Magnus raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a response. What do you mean? We mean, Ingrid said, moving to stand beside her sister, that we have found something here that we never had in your service, despite all the honor and respect you showed us. And what is that? The Jarl asked, though Erik could see growing understanding in his experienced eyes. A home, Astrid replied simply. Not just a place to sleep between battles, but a true home with people who depend on us and whom we have come to care for deeply. Erik felt his heart skip as he realized what the sisters were saying. Around the square, he could see similar recognition dawning on the faces of the villagers. These women, who had arrived as desperate refugees, were choosing to remain among them. Magnus studied the two sisters for a long moment, then let his gaze wander across the assembled crowd. Erik could see the Jarl taking in the defensive improvements visible around the settlement, the way the villagers had positioned themselves protectively around Astrid and Ingrid, and the obvious bonds of mutual respect that had formed. "I see," Magnus said thoughtfully. "You have found new loyalties." "Not new loyalties, my lord," Astrid corrected respectfully. "Expanded loyalties. We will always honor the service we gave to you and the kindness you showed us, but we have discovered that there are different kinds of service, different ways to live with honor." Thorvald, who had remained silent since his humiliating confession, suddenly stepped forward. "Uncle, surely you cannot allow this. They are sworn to our house, bound by oaths of service. They cannot simply choose to abandon their duties." Magnus turned to his nephew with an expression of cold displeasure. "You speak of oaths and duties, Thorvald? You, who broke the most sacred bonds of loyalty and brotherhood with your lies and betrayal. You have no standing to speak of honor." The rebuke silenced Thorvald completely, and he stepped back among the other warriors, his face burning with shame. "Besides," Magnus continued, turning back to the sisters, "their oaths were to serve faithfully in my household. They have fulfilled those oaths admirably for many years. I have no desire to hold unwilling warriors in my service, especially ones who have found a cause they believe in more strongly." Erik stepped forward, surprising himself with his boldness. "Lord Magnus, if I may speak." The Jarl's attention focused on him with an intensity that was almost physical. "You are the farmer who gave them shelter, I assume." "I am Erik Gunnarsson, yes, and I want you to know that Astrid and Ingrid have brought nothing but honor to your house by their actions here. They have protected the innocent, taught the willing, and served with the same dedication they showed in your service. If anything, they have expanded the reputation of your household rather than diminished it." Magnus smiled for the first time since his arrival, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "Well spoken, farmer, and I can see the truth of your words in the faces of these people." The Jarl walked slowly around the square, observing the defensive preparations and the way the villagers stood together. When he returned to his original position, his decision was clear in his bearing. "Astrid and Ingrid, daughters of Hakon," he said formally, "I release you from your oaths of service to my house. You have served with distinction and honor, and you leave with my blessing and gratitude." A collective sigh seemed to escape from the watching crowd, though whether of relief or disappointment, Erik could not tell. "However," Magnus continued, raising his voice, "I do not release you from all obligations." Erik felt his stomach tighten again at these ominous words. "From this day forward, you shall serve as my appointed representatives in this region of Denmark. You will protect these settlements and their people in my name, and I will consider any attack upon them as an attack upon my own holdings." The implications of this declaration rippled through the crowd like waves. To have the protection of a powerful northern Jarl was beyond anything the small farming communities had ever dared hope for. "Furthermore," Magnus added, "I will establish a small garrison here to support you, and ensure that this settlement receives priority in any trade agreements my merchants negotiate in Danish waters." Erik could hardly believe what he was hearing. In one stroke, Magnus had not only allowed the sisters to remain, but had elevated their small community to a position of unprecedented security and prosperity. Astrid and Ingrid both dropped to one knee before their former lord. "We accept this honor gladly, Lord Magnus," Astrid said, "and we swear to prove worthy of your continued trust." Magnus nodded approvingly, then turned to address the entire gathering. "People of Bjornstad and the surrounding lands, you are now under the protection of my house. Treat these Shieldmaidens with the respect due to my personal representatives, and know that their word carries my authority." As the formal ceremony concluded, and Magnus began making arrangements for the garrison he had promised, Erik found himself standing beside the two women who had so dramatically changed his life. "So," he said quietly, "it seems you are to remain after all." "If you will still have us," Ingrid replied with a smile, "though I suspect our status has changed somewhat since this morning." Erik looked around at the celebrating villagers, the respectful warriors, and the two remarkable women who had chosen his simple farm as their home. "I think," he said with growing wonder, "that all of our lives have changed more than we could have imagined." As the sun set over the fjord and Magnus's ships prepared to depart, Erik realized that his quiet existence as a simple farmer had ended forever. In its place, something far more complex and exciting had begun, built on the foundation of kindness shown to strangers in their time of need. The giant Shieldmaiden sisters had indeed brought shocking changes to his world, but as Erik watched them confidently taking up their new roles as protectors and leaders, he knew he would not trade this new life for all the peaceful solitude in the world.